We have seen protests around the country, people expressing themselves saying they want to see the economy open up in certain states. Chris Wallace, hosting the Fox News program Fox News Sunday yesterday, had Mike Pence, the vice president, as his guest. And he had asked him about the protests, and the vice president went on with an answer about the things they were trying to do at the White House. And this was the follow-up from Chris Wallace.
But, Mr. Vice President, in a number of these cases, these protesters who are not social distancing are saying they don't want to wait. In many cases, they're protesting your own guidelines to stop the spread. On Friday, the president tweeted this, and I want to put it up. Liberate Minnesota, liberate Michigan, and liberate Virginia and save your great Second Amendment. It is under siege. Washington Governor Inslee responded, the president is fomenting domestic rebellion and spreading lies, even while his own administration says the virus is real and deadly. So what does the president mean? Because you've got guidelines that are calling for social distancing and staying at home. Even your new guidelines to reopen the country are very phased and gradual. What does the president mean when he says liberate these states?
The American people know that no one in America wants to reopen this country more than President Donald Trump. And on Thursday, the president directed us to lay out guidelines for when and how states could responsibly do that. And in the president's tweets and public statements, I can assure you he's going to continue to encourage governors to find ways to safely and responsibly let America go back to work.
That is the vice president with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. Well, let's try to make some sense of all of this right now. Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, is joining us, tweeting at DRB, as in Dr. B. Rosenberg. Bill, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Good morning.
So the question of messaging from the White House, the polling information we're seeing about whether people believe in the president or not, and whether they think we ought to get back to work, help us make sense of what America is saying, what the White House is saying, and what the states are saying.
Well, it's a tall order that you just gave me.
That's why I knew I could turn it to you, and you'd deliver.
So let's begin with the fact that in terms of the polling data, that our president has remarkably been able to keep approximately the same degree of public approval his whole administration, leveling in the low to mid 40s. But at the same time, if you take the numbers take a look closer and you disaggregate them, there's a major difference between Democrats and Republicans. About 90% of Republicans feel that the president's doing a good job on his handling of the virus, while the Democrats are abysmally low in terms of their degree of support. Internationally, I should also say that most world leaders have sort of risen in terms of their stature in their country in terms of handling the COVID situation. President Trump has sort of maintained himself or gone a little bit lower. So that's where we are in terms of public opinion. A lot of people are actually very confused by what happens at the White House, and that's highlighted each day by the Cuomo versus Trump press conferences that go on for over an hour each day, and it's very conflicting information. Each day they each put out information, and it's almost a question of source credibility. Who are you going to trust? Are you going to trust Cuomo? Are you going to trust Fauci? Are you going to trust Trump? And I think that's really leading to more confusion. One of the concepts that I've talked about for a long time is that Donald Trump often operates on a concept that I'm going to call a kernel of truth. If you dig deep enough into everything that the president says, there's some kernel that is actually happening or did happen, and he then goes and on a riff, as the musicians do, and continues that story in a way that sort of then begins to lack credibility. Vice President Pence has the remarkable ability of being able to defend the president every day, even though the messaging from the White House changes essentially every day. Basically, between is the president under his concept and the Federalist Society's concept of a unitary president, the one who has absolute control over leading us, or is it more of a sense that the states have the principal role of leading us in this attack against the coronavirus. So I think people are essentially confused if they are paying attention every day to what's happening, because the messages are very inconsistent and the policies of how we're moving forward are as well.
There's some inconsistency within the briefings from day to day. There's also inconsistency in the message delivered, say, in the briefing room and what might be being delivered on Twitter, which is another thing that we're seeing. And, you know, the president went out of his way yesterday to say thank you to Andrew Cuomo. I have a good relationship with the governor, even though they have sparred on TV. I guess a bigger question right now is, so what is the determining factor when the states decide which way to go? Is this a red versus blue? Is this something where public opinion is going to sway governors, or are they going to use something else as their guidepost? And how does this figure into the federal versus the state leadership in how the states should proceed?
Well, I think what's really been fascinating is that if you can take back a few steps on this whole saga of the virus, you're seeing laid bare the whole role of the president as well as federalism. We've seen in the past week or so the creation of essentially 3 interstate compacts. I'm going to call them the East Coast Compact, the Midwest Compact, and the West Coast Compact, that are all trying in their own ways to organize how they're going to respond to the virus, how they're going to develop purchasing groups, how they're going to set policy, and so forth. And then we have the rest of the country. And the rest of the country is primarily a red state phenomena, while the 3 interstate compacts are largely, not entirely, but largely Democratic states, the exception really being the state of Ohio, who has joined the Midwest Compact. So the president sort of set this up in some ways because he initially said it was the states really didn't do enough initially, and the cities and the World Health Organization and CDC, and he was out on a blame trip. Then he wanted to assume responsibility and say it was going to be directed by him, but then didn't really provide the resources for the states to be able to do the job that they felt they needed to do, particularly in terms of obtaining equipment and personal protective equipment, like masks and gowns and so forth. So what's happening is now that we're seeing this bifurcation of responsibility between the federal government and the state governments, the states have said, basically, we need to take care of our people. We're going to put into place these shelter-at-home rules. And at the same time, other states have said, we're not going to have shelter-at-home rules, or if we are, that it's going to be done in a different way than maybe many of these states, such as California or Washington or New York. So it's set up this almost, I wouldn't call it just red state, blue states, but states' rights versus the federal government. And in some ways, it's almost our version of a modern civil war. What's going to happen when people leave the non-compact states and go into compact states? They're going to bring the virus with them. And I think at that point, we're really going to see a very sharp sort of confrontation between states on protecting human life.
So in other words, this will become a state versus state, you think?
Yes, absolutely. And I think states that are part of these compacts and states that are not. I think another point that I would make is that ultimately every state's going to be impacted. Initially, it looked like it was Washington State and New York. But as this has continued to play out, it's gotten much worse in certain states and then it's begun to spread across the country. And my sort of prediction is that more people are touched by this when they start losing family members or when they themselves get sick. I think they're going to end up taking the perspective that maybe this is more serious than we thought, that walking on the beach is maybe not a good idea, that being in crowds and going to basketball or football games is something that should be stopped for a much longer period of time than we thought, because it's going to impact them more directly. And I think that's going to cause a refocusing on what the policy should be, who's responsible, and how much resource should be provided.
When people go to the polls in 197 days or mail it in before then, or however that's handled, Bill, do they blame or give credit to the President of the United States? In other words, is he the person that will be determining whether or not they vote for him or not, whether this is successful or not, regardless of how much he is an influencer in this?
Well, I think in political science we talked about a concept, and I think I've mentioned it before to you, the concept of retrospective voting. Are you better off now with the president you have than you would have been perhaps without that president, maybe somebody else? And I think that's the judgment that's really going to come forward. The president is obviously heavily going to lean on his comments like the WHO has failed us and he's taken away the funding for them, that he's put in travel bans from China and from Europe, and he's going to claim that those actions really changed the course of history and really saved a lot of American lives. One of the things he doesn't mention is that 37 countries around the world had put travel bans on China before the United States did, so it wasn't something so unique. It's not that it was a bad idea, but he is crafting his message in a way that basically presents him in the most positive light. All politicians will do that. But the question is, at the end of the day, how will Americans feel about what's transpired and whether or not the actions taken were correct or not? Right now we're about 40,000 deaths in the United States. By the time this is over, the estimates may go as high as 100,000 deaths, and I think that's going to play an important role in terms of the 2020 presidential election, not just about the virus, but leadership and trust and whether or not the American people feel that they've been handled in a way that's appropriate or not.
Dr. Bill Rosenberg. Bill, thanks for being here.
Okay, have a great day. Take care.
You too.
Stay
Dr.
safe.
William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University. He's the author of News Verdicts, the debates and presidential campaigns, among other things. And he is tweeting at Dr., as in Dr. DRB Rosenberg, Rosenberg.